Hello, today we're going to be finding the solutions of the quadratic in our final way, which would be solving by using the quadratic formula. Make sure to take notes as you go and complete the survey that follows the video. So, before we get into actually using it, let's go over what the steps are for finding the solutions using the quadratic formula. The first and foremost thing is you have to memorize the quadratic formula. It will not be given to you on the test, so you need to make sure you know it. Now, we're going to be talking a little bit about discriminant. We've already worked with the vertex formula with the negative b over 2a. Really, it's taking those two pieces, those two different formulas, and putting them together. So now that you have the quadratic formula memorized, this is what you shall do. First, you're going to identify a, b, and c from the standard form of a quadratic equation. We're going to substitute everything in, and as we go, you're going to simplify the discriminant, and that's the part that's underneath the square root, b squared minus 4ac. And then at the same time, you're going to simplify the denominator. So you're going to end up with a new fraction. Now, since there's two problems here, you have a plus or a minus. We're going to split it into two problems, which one will be a plus and one will be a minus, and then we will solve. Then finally, you're going to write your answers as a point, because remember, when we're finding solutions to a quadratic, we're identifying the x-intercepts. And so when we find the answers to our quadratic formula, those represent the x-intercepts. These could be whole numbers, decimals, or fractions. So what is the actual quadratic formula? Here it is. What we have is, remember the vertex form, we have negative b over 2a when we found the x value of the vertex. And inside is the discriminant, b squared minus 4ac. Now, since there are always two solutions, we have a plus or minus here, which will help us get our two solutions. So let's go through a couple of examples. Let's first start by making sure we can identify a, b, and c. A is always the number that's next to the x squared term. It is always the constant, not the x squared. B is always next to the linear term, or the x value, and it is the coefficient, not the x. And c is always the number by itself. It's the constant that's always found. Sometimes b and c are missing. So let's look at this first example. We have y equals 3x squared minus 7x plus 2. The coefficient to the x squared is 3, so that is our value of a. The coefficient for the linear term for x is negative 7, so that's b. And then the constant, the number by itself, is c. Let's take a look at another example. And here, I have an x squared term. Well, the coefficient of the x squared term is a negative, so what that actually means is negative 1. The b value isn't here, so the number to represent a missing would be the number 0. And we need to have a number for b, since it is in the quadratic formula. Then finally, c is going to be the constant by itself, or 5. Last example, we have y equals 4x squared plus 9x, 4x plus 9x squared plus 1. So I thought I would mix it up on you a little bit, and we want to make sure we know what a, b, and c are. A is always next to the x squared. It's the coefficient. As you can see, this number is in the middle here. So a is 9. B is the one with the linear term, so it's 4, and c is 1. So let's go ahead and take these problems a step further and actually do the quadratic formula. So the first example we worked with was the 3x squared minus 7x plus 2. We've identified what a, b, and c are. So the next thing we want to do is substitute these values into the quadratic formula. Now remember here, with this opposite b, we take whatever the sign is of b and change it to the opposite sign. So in this problem, we have negative 7. When we substitute it in, it's going to become a positive 7. Also, as you substitute your values in for b, a, and c for the discriminant, make sure you use parentheses. It is extremely important to make sure you're using parentheses, especially when it comes to something where it's getting squared. We want to make sure that this number is being squared. So now that we've substituted everything in, we're going to simplify the discriminant, that's the number underneath the square root, and the denominator at the same time. Go ahead and use your calculator. There's no shame in doing so. When you do that, the square root will simplify to 25, and at the bottom, 2 times 3 is 6. So now that we've simplified, we're going to go ahead and split this up. Since we have plus or minus, one of the fractions is going to be a plus, and one of the fractions is going to be a minus. Our final step here is to go ahead and simplify this. We're going to go down to decimals. So what you'll do is in your calculator, you'll do 7 plus the square root of 25, get an answer, and then whatever you get, divide by 6. Same thing for here, except now we're going to do 7 minus the square root of 25, hit equals to get an answer, and then divide by 6. The two answers you get are 2 and 0.33. Remember, these are points, so you're going to write it out as 20 and 0.330, because these are our x-intercepts. Let's do our second example. Remember, b here is 0. So when I put it into our opposite b, 0 doesn't have a sign. And so I'm just going to put it in as 0. So what I have is 0 plus or minus the square root, 0 squared minus 4 times negative 1 times 5, with a and c there. And then on the bottom, 2 times negative 1. So just to review those steps again, we substitute the values in now that we know what a, b, and c are. Simplify what's in the radical. So in your calculator, type it in exactly how you see here with parentheses and all, or do order of operations. And at the bottom, 2 times negative 1 is negative 2. So our answers are 0 plus or minus the square root of 20 divided by negative 2. Since we have two fractions, one with plus and minus, we're going to split it up. I got 0 plus the square root of 20 divided by negative 2, and 0 minus the square root of 20 divided by negative 2. So you're going to do 0 plus the square root of 20 in your calculator, get an answer, divide by negative 2. Do 0 minus the square root of 20, and then divide by negative 2. So we get the answers of negative 2.24 and a positive 2.24. What that is, though, is not the final answers. We have them written as points. So don't forget to write them as coordinates, because they are x-intercepts. Last example here, 4x plus 9x squared plus 1. We've already identified a, b, c, so we're ready to substitute in. Since it's opposite b, b is 4, so when I substitute it in, I get a negative 4. Once again, I got b squared minus 4ac, so 4 squared minus 4 times 9 times 1, and on the bottom, 2 times a, or 2 times 9. So once again, we're going to simplify the square root and the number in the denominator, and I get negative 20 over 18. Next step would be to split it into two terms. But what we find here is that we have ourselves a negative 20. So if that's the case, what I want you to try to do here is type in your calculator negative 4 plus the square root of negative 20. Something special happens with this because we cannot take the square root of a negative number. Since that's the case, if you put in the square root of a negative number, your calculator is going to say error. Therefore, our answer is going to be imaginary. For this class, this is as far as we're going to go with imaginary numbers. Once you hit Algebra 2, you'll get a little bit more into detail on how we can actually simplify a number such as the square root of negative 20. But for this class, we're just going to say our solutions are imaginary. So what does that mean? That means that our lovely graph does not cross the x-axis ever. So the key things to remember, you're going to get more than one answer most times. If you try to take the square root of a negative, your solutions are imaginary. Make sure you're paying attention to the signs, especially with the opposite b and putting parentheses around the b squared. And most importantly, memorize your quadratic formula. Go ahead and answer these survey questions, and we'll see you tomorrow in class.